Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod to talk about MSU's last true road game of the season in Iowa City against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Michigan State is riding a five-game winning streak, all against Quad One teams. And as we record this on Tuesday night, a win by MSU assures the Spartans of a Big Ten title. But with a Michigan loss to Maryland, it might actually get them an outright title. A quick reminder to check our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can find ways to support the show, visit our sponsors, and also other cool deals on there as well. All right, so Rod, Iowa, well, this is 15 and 14 overall, 6 and 12 in the Big Ten, and they are out of the NCAA tournament conversation outside of, winning, getting auto bid by winning was like 5 games or something. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday,
It would
Saturday.
be
Yeah.
5 games.
5 games, yeah. In 5 straight days, which, is not going to happen. They lost Owen Freeman earlier this year. He was their big man inside. He was very talented, although he foul prone. And they lost him. They pretty much lost their chance at postseason, in addition to even postseason in the Big Ten tournament, because right now they are in dire straits. They basically need to win one game, either beating Michigan State or winning at Nebraska. They're 74th in the Ken Palm overall. So they're not having a great, they're not a good season, obviously, at
Yeah.
6 and
So
12.
let's talk about all this and a little more.
And I'll just put the points out too that I've watched almost every Iowa game because of my wife and is an Iowa fan. So I I know the Hawkeyes as intimately as I do the Spartans probably.
Okay. Um, so then we're coming at it from two different positions because I
Exactly.
obviously, and I've seen a lot of them, but I don't watch it the same way that you do. So it'll be interesting to see
Yes.
if we differ on any perceptions of this team. I actually think when they had Owen Freeman, they were certainly not a great team by any stretch, but they were a capable team. I would say certainly a team that uh, if you were playing them, especially in Iowa City, you'd have to worry about because not only did they have um, the perimeter shooting from their backcourt, which we're used to, um, but they also had in Freeman a legit post player. Now, Owen Freeman is their leading scorer and leading rebounder, and
Right.
I'm pretty sure he's going to remain that. So he was having, and he also gave them actually legitimate rim protection too. He's a good player, maybe a little bit in obscurity because Iowa hasn't been very good in his 2 years there, but he's a good player. If you put him on a top half team, more people would know his name. He got
Sure.
hurt at the end of January. So since he got hurt, you mentioned they're 6 and 12 in the league. They are um, 2 and 6 since he got hurt. So I think it says something to
Yeah.
go from 4 and 6 to 6 and 12 with him out. I think it was a major, major factor. Again, not that they were a likely even an NCAA tournament team with him, but they certainly would have been more competitive. And I think it's had something to do with where they're at now, where frankly, they're not a great bet to make Indianapolis.
No.
Like they're currently tied for the last spot with USC, I believe, at
And
six
they
and
don't have the
twelve.
tiebreaker either.
Yeah, and so it's going to be difficult, and so all of that, plus the fact that this would be the second year in a row with Iowa not making the NCAA tournament after they'd made it. I don't even know what the streak was, but it was fairly lengthy. Must have been at least like 4 or 5 years in a row, right? That
The
they
NCAA
made
tournament?
it.
Sure. I think that's probably about right. Yeah.
um, Under Fran McCaffrey, there started to be talk that Fran was going to be gone. There were rumors about this last spring that he
Mm-hmm.
was looking to move on, and lots of anecdotal evidence that points in that direction. One son transferred to Butler. Another son, who's a highly regarded high school player, opted to commit to Butler rather than Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you mentioned, there may be other reasons why his younger son wanted to get out of Iowa City.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think in a general sense, you look at that and you think, boy, that doesn't seem like a guy that is planning on being around much longer, you know? And there's continued, especially basically since Freeman went down. There have been lots of rumors. I've heard it from multiple people that would, are in various degrees of they ought to know kind of positions that Fran McCaffrey is probably going to retire. But last Friday, Jeff Borzello, who's a writer for ESPN, had an article on the coaching carousel. So he was addressing all the jobs that are currently open and lots that have been speculated about, Iowa being one of them. He
Hmm.
said sources had indicated to him Fran McCaffrey was definitely not retiring, which
Sure.
cuts against a lot of this smoke that's been floating around. Today, Fran McCaffrey at a press conference said unequivocally, he is committed to his kids. He's not going anywhere. So, what are we to do with that? This is how I read it. And you tell me what your read is, since you probably have some impressions that I don't because I don't
Sure.
follow them as closely.
Okay.
I think the smoke, I don't think people were making it up. I think they were hearing things. I suspect they were hearing things from people in the athletic department or perhaps boosters or proxies of those kinds of people
Hmm.
who wanted to believe that this would happen.
Yeah.
But I take the Borzello piece and today the guy himself saying it as a sign that at the very least, Fran has drawn a line. He's not walking out that door of his own volition. So we would ask the reasonable question to ask would be, would Iowa fire him? I don't see it. I don't think they would do that. I just think he's been, not that he's a national championship coach, but it just, again, you may know better than I, but it seems to me he's built up too much equity for them to do that at this stage. I think he'd have to lose for another year or two, and then maybe it reaches that point. But I don't think they could do it right now. I don't think they would. So you could say, you can read today as maybe Fran kind of feeling like he needed to put that out there to draw a line, maybe with those in his own community, meaning the athletic department, boosters, et cetera, that, hey, I'm not walking out of my own volition. So if you want to do something, let's go.
Hmm.
And it could be that. It could be that the rumors that were out there were just coming from people who are not well informed and were taken more seriously than they should have been. Um, or it could be, I've seen people suggest today that maybe it's Fran starting a negotiation process for a buyout that would be very large if he's to leave. So lots of possibilities. Personally, I think that means the odds have shifted pretty seriously in favor of Fran McCaffrey being the coach next year. That's how I read it. But you
Hmm.
let me know what you think.
So I thought probably for the last 6 weeks or so that he's gone. The other, I'll present other evidence in that Connor McCaffrey is also has a job in Indianapolis as well. So all
That's
three of
right.
his boys are there. He's been a longtime boyfriend for Caitlin Clark. There's rumors that they're going to get engaged soon. I mean, whether that's true or not, who knows? There's every reason to think that Fran's kind of, it's time to move on. Uh, I think the other thing with Fran, so we always joke about the Fran Con 1 through 9, right? If
Hmm.
you're familiar with those pictures, for those who have
Yeah.
not looked at it, please go and and
One,
check
one
it
of the
out.
all-time best
Fran
memes.
Con 3 is the best, right?
Right.
Where
I think FranCon 7, Fran is on the move,
he's on the move.
is
Yeah,
my
I think that's
favorite. But
3. I think it goes from 9 to 1. I think Fran Con 1's like
okay.
the Mount St.
Yeah.
Helens or whatever,
It's the third to last.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So, anyways, but pictures of Fran just being angry. I would say this year, I have not seen anything beyond FranCon 6. Now, it's possible that I just have missed the few options. He seems way less engaged than usual than ever before, even like last year. Does that mean anything? I don't know, but just my impression is that he's kind of done. Now, he said what he said today, and there's no question that those are some strong words. However, because there's so much talk about him leaving, and this is the same thing that Izzo will be presented with too. I mean, at some point you've got to retire and be done. But there's a lot of work going on in the background that you want to try and maintain. Recruits that have committed to you, current recruiting processes. Uh, you don't want that all to fall to pieces. You don't want your team players to leave. Maybe you're not 100% committed to retiring yet, right? I mean, I think this is about the same time last year that we heard Jawan Howard, you know, vociferously saying he's sticking around and he's not going anywhere and all this stuff. And
Well,
you know,
there's a difference.
I realize there's
There's
a
one
difference in the
difference.
situation that he's
He
not,
didn't.
you know, that he'd
Well,
been losing for a couple times
Juwan
and he had all
Howard
kinds of
did not
problems.
make. Didn't Juwan Howard did not make that choice.
Right. No,
Yeah.
but also he retired. He was not fired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's
That's
be honest. He wasn't fired.
that is semantics. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
I would push back on that a little bit because my understanding of the Michigan situation is that Ward Manuel, the athletic director, was trying to salvage Juwan's job, ultimately could not do it when he was basically told by the administration and by boosters, this has got to be it. And so they worked out a resignation. That was not Juwan Howard just saying, yeah, it's really time for me to step away. To me, I could be wrong, but to me, it feels like for this thing to happen, Fran's got to actually be willing to do that because they're not going to push him.
yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see. Yeah. I mean,
Do you
you can be
do you
entirely
think
right.
they'll fire him? Do you
I
think that's
think
possible?
I don't think it's likely that they will fire him.
Okay,
However, I could see him getting fired next season before the season's over.
sure, I'll buy that. But
And
like I
and and
said,
that, and this is and this is sort of that business decision. Do you get out with the posse before the posse forms, right? You know, and that may be a decision that he makes. Like if they miss a Big Ten tournament, which is likely going to happen, I think they've got like a 17-20% chance to make the Big Ten tournament right now. They have to basically, I mean, unless they beat Michigan State, which is, I think we're going to both say is pretty unlikely. It's possible, but it's probably pretty unlikely. They have to win at Nebraska. Now they beat Nebraska in Iowa City, so they could pull it off. And Nebraska is kind of all over the place, so who knows what
but
happens there.
Nebraska's also got a ton to play for.
Well, but so does Iowa in some respects, right? They're playing
They
to get the
do, but
postseason. They're not as good a team. There's no question,
and
but
they're on the road. That's kind of
yes.
my
But they
yeah.
won at Rutgers. So, I mean, you know, they
Yeah.
beat Harper and Bailey. So I don't know. I mean, this team's kind of weird that way, I suppose. And these are flawed teams that are playing each other, right? These are all the teams at the bottom of the Big Ten with losing records. Anyway, I don't think it's unlikely. I don't think it's, I think there could be a tremendous amount of pressure from the athletic department. It may be like, we're not going to fire you, but just so you know, if things don't start out well next year, we're going to have to let you go. The fan base is not happy. They're all talking about him leaving. They all want someone else. They want Darren DeVries, who was a former coach at Drake last year. He's an Iowa guy. He's at West Virginia now, because that comes probably Tucker DeVries. I think he pretty much get a redshirt this year because he had these weird injuries. Or Ben McCollum at Drake. There's certainly other options. I get the impression he has a lot of goodwill, but they've been really bad for a couple years in a row and not really competitive for the most part. And now to miss the Big Ten tournament, it's pretty embarrassing. Iowa's not a great basketball program, but they're not like the dregs of the Big Ten. They shouldn't be this bad. And they certainly haven't been since Licklider. So I think he's certainly the winningest coach in Iowa basketball history, but I don't know that's going to get him more than part of next year right now. So it'd be a decision for him, I suppose. It may just be the easy thing to just take the retirement and just walk away and go hang out with your kids next year. But I don't
Okay.
think there's any way we can know. My just impression is watching him, he does not seem like the same Fran on the sidelines. Like if we saw Izzo and he's never pumping his fist and like, pounding the table and all kind of stuff, you kind of like, I wonder if he's kind of like
Right.
lost a little bit of the spark or something. I
Right.
kind of feel like that's what it is when I watch Fran. Now, maybe it's just me just imagining things, but that's my impression.
No, I've heard that from other people too. I think that seems like a reasonable conclusion. But all right, let's bottom line this and then we can move on to this game or talking about Iowa,
Yeah.
I guess, more specifically. Give me your percentage chance that Fran is back next fall.
I think a third. I think he's
33%.
I think it
Okay.
is. I think he's 2/3 chance of not being back. But
I'm going to go completely the opposite direction.
mhm,
80% he's back.
yeah. Well,
I
we'll
just
see.
think I just think when you've obviously got because I'm concluding after today that Borzello talked to people that are either very close to Fran McCaffrey or to Fran McCaffrey when he said
Hmm.
he's not retiring.
Sure.
And so I put those two things together, and to me, it makes it highly likely. But you may be right. It may be that eventually pressure gets to him and he starts to realize, hey, I'm kind of a dead ender here if I stay. Better to go out with a modicum of dignity.
Right. maybe he's got an exit strategy, like one of his assistants takes over. I mean, can't imagine this happening. Like,
That
pulling a
I can't see.
Bo Ryan. I don't
He
think that
doesn't have the
happened, but
juice.
I
He
don't know.
doesn't have the juice for that.
I don't think so either. But you leave midway through the season, you leave the athletic program no choice.
Oh, you mean start next season at the ball right? Yeah, I see what you mean.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I have no
but
idea.
the problem there is I don't think he would have, obviously he would be able to get a guy a tryout essentially, but I
Right.
think what made the Bo Ryan thing work is he had so much power
Sure.
that not only was guard an interim, I believe guard got the deal. He got more than just a, well, you finish out this year. I think
Hmm.
that's how it went down.
Yeah.
And I can't see that. Like
I don't either.
he's got leverage for himself. I don't think he's got leverage like that for anybody
Yeah.
else.
No, I think you're entirely right. And I think, the team's gonna be worse next year than they are this year. That's just that's my
Yeah,
guess.
possibly.
So it'll be a rough year from, and which may also, contribute a little bit to his decision. So, all right, well, let's talk about the team this year and of what it is. So, yeah, and this is a disclaimer. Iowa's my second favorite team, and they are your second least favorite team in the Big Ten. So there you go. So
Well,
we're
that
well balanced.
usually this year Illinois,
Well,
but
sure.
Illinois got so bad so fast that I started to actually have pity for them, and then I was rooting for them in their last game. So
Well, they're
maybe
playing
Iowa
Michigan.
still
That's like,
is. Iowa's still down there, that's for sure.
yeah. All right. So on offense, they've been okay this year. They're certainly not as good as you mentioned when Freeman went down in late January, but they are 34th overall in offense. They are pretty decent shooting the three for 23rd. They're 31st shooting the twos, although I think that's probably a little bit worse. My guess is since Freeman's gone out, they don't turn the ball over very much, which is why their offensive efficiency is pretty good. They're 13th there in turnover percentage. They shoot a decent amount of threes, certainly not as much as some other teams in the league, but they do shoot quite a few. They cannot offensive rebound. They're 313th in free throw shooting, and surprisingly, they're 313th. And in free throw shooting, they are really bad. They're 338th in getting to the line, and even when they're there, they don't shoot very well at 70.5%, which I do think also is due to Owen Freeman. So they're probably a little better since then, but they are playing some stranger players just because of trying to fill in for Freeman and his absence inside. So they're
Right.
250th nationally from the free throw line. I think in general we've always described Iowa as a pretty good offense and a pretty bad defense, but this year their offense is I think okay to slightly better than okay, and that's kind of where I'd put them.
Yeah. So this is how I would see it. The shooting is really good from the floor, and it's weird too. We've talked about Michigan State as a hard team to understand because good free throw shooting normally indicates you'll be a good 3-point shooting team.
Right.
MSU has not been that, and it's been um, a weird dichotomy between those two things for MSU. Iowa's the reverse, which I think is even stranger that you shoot the three very well. I mean, they're just about 38% as a team. That's a great number, but they can't hit free throws. I mean,
Right.
70% is not good. Like we said, sub 300. So I think it's a couple things that are separating this because as a shooting team and in terms of the ball handling, the turnover mitigation, they're pretty much on par with what you've come to expect from Fran McCaffrey teams.
Right.
He's even had some teams that were better than this overall that didn't shoot the ball quite as well as this group does.
That's right.
But the big problems has been not getting to the line and then not converting when you do get there. And then even worse is the offensive rebounding. I mean,
Yeah.
they are, when you take, we'll talk about the defensive rebounding in a second, but when you take both sides into consideration, Iowa they got to be the worst high rebounding team in America. Have to be.
I, oh, they certainly it feels like when you watch them, yeah,
Yeah.
they're
I'm
atrocious.
going back and looking at recent years. Now, in the Garza era, let's say, so 2020, they were 52nd in offensive rebounding rate. The next year, he was also there 81st. Still okay.
Hmm.
51st, that was the year of the first Murray brothers emergence. And then the year after that, they were 65th. Now, last year, they did fall off. They were 232nd.
Yep.
But this year, 313. I mean, it's off a cliff. And that's not just Owen Freeman's absence, obviously. You don't get the 313 over like 8 games. That's
No.
with him too.
Yeah.
They are just awful. And I think that's the big reason why you see this checking in as only a good offensive team instead of a very good one.
Yeah.
It's that they just don't ever get second shots and they don't get easy points at the free throw line. Everything has to come from the floor. That's a hard way to live.
Yeah. And I'd say just watching the Hawkeyes this year, that that the free throw issue where is generally the people who are getting fouled are ones who are not good free throw shooters. So the ones who are good, like a Peyton Sanford, Josh Dix, they tend not to get draw fouls. Dix does a little bit, and I mean Sanford does occasionally, but for the most part, the guys inside or their guards who are driving are not good free throw shooters. And you'll see that, and like in the previous years, their free throw shooting was good from those guards who were creating contact going the lane. Like I can't think of his name now. Freeman. Yeah, he would get fouled, and he was a good foul shooter. And those players right now aren't very good. And their interior players are very poor free throw shooters, which is why it's
But,
kind of that weird sort of dichotomy.
but you know, I look at it, and even some of the guys who are good shooters. So we'll return to this in a second. But Thelwell, their point guard,
Yes,
forty-four percent shooter from three, 68 at the line.
he's really the outlier for sure. Yeah, as far as
Dix Dix is a great jump shooter, 78% at the line. Not bad, but I would have expected he would be an 80%
I'm actually
plus
surprised
guy.
that that's low. Yeah, I agree. I don't feel
Um,
like he's that bad, but he is.
Harding, 76% at the line. Again, not bad, but just a little bit worse than you'd think. The younger Sanford, 63% at the line, 38% from three.
Hmm.
So I think it's even to some extent, guys that you would look at and say, well, I would expect that guy could hit free throws, maybe aren't quite as good as you might think. And then you
Yeah.
add that to what you talked about, just the wrong guys on top of that, getting there more frequently, and it's a problem. But I think the bigger problem is that they just don't ever shoot them.
Yes.
That's
Well,
the
and that
biggest problem.
yeah, that's definitely a reflection of just the way their offense runs. And the rebounding is, I think, entirely. I feel like the Murray twins, they were there. I mean, they were there with Garza the last year, and so they were definitely. Uh, was it Keegan? Was the first? I'm trying to remember now. I
Yep.
can't remember.
Yep.
Yeah, he was. He definitely had a lot of rebounds, even offensive rebounds, even when Garza was there. And then they sort of, both those Murray twins sort of maintained things for a couple of years. And then when they left, they lost all their athleticism inside and ability to, and anyone can rebounds. And obviously the guards don't rebound. I mean, you're like you said, nobody rebounds. And so it becomes a real problem. And that, just moving on to defense, I mean, it's really bad in defense. If you're a Michigan State fan, you can't envision a better matchup for Michigan State on the boards than this team. This is still not the worst team ever in defensively for McCaffrey, but they're still terrible. They're 167th overall. They do create a couple of turnovers where they're 90th. That's about the only thing they can kind of do when they just press occasionally. But they're 345th against twos, and what there are 352 teams, I think, in the
360 some.
360
But it's
something. Yeah,
still it's
it's almost
incredibly awful.
incomprehensible for a Power Five
Yes.
school to be that bad. Uh,
Yes.
they're 94th in block percentage, but again, that was largely due to the presence of Freeman. They're 248th against the threes, so I guess you say they're better against the threes and the twos. And defensive rebounding is 291st, which is, again, it's it's almost impossible to imagine a team that bad at defensive rebound. But it's every team that goes in and tattoos them
Yeah.
in the Big Ten that I feel every game, and even when they do get a stop, it's like they don't get the stop right, and so it's been a very tough year to watch them play. And then we'll go just generally they're paced team. They're 57th in tempo and 14th in average length of offensive possession, which when we talked to Coach Garland last year, or maybe the year before, anyway, he said that is sometimes a problem because they go so fast they're taking bad shots and then they're out of position for defense with the teams going the other way, which happens with Michigan State frequently.
Yeah. Uh, so returning to the defense, it's crazy that defense against twos, even though, as you said, the block numbers have fallen off a cliff since Freeman went down, but we're talking about full season numbers. They're
Yeah.
still in the top 100 in block percentage. Now, they're not going to play like a team ranked there. They're going to have problems protecting the rim in this game, most likely. But on the season, they have done that when Freeman played 2/3 of their games,
Hmm.
and they're still 345th against twos. That's normally, if you were a top 100 block percentage team, that's going to usually equate to at least something in, to use Izzo speak, you're at least halfway a member of the human race at that point, and they're not. I mean, for a high major team, that number is so catastrophically bad that when I see it, I can't believe they're as good as 167th overall on defense. I really can't, because you could scarcely be worse. Um, the one thing that's keeping them afloat is the turnover creation.
Right.
What's interesting about it, what's worth noting is even though they're 90th in opponent TO percentage, most of that is coming not via steals.
Right.
And you mentioned they are going to pressure some, and they'll also play a lot of zone. But what that means is they're forcing, most of the turnovers are traveling, they're a ball sailing out of bounds. They're not live ball turnovers, which is what steals are by definition. So that's a good thing if you're Michigan State, because it means that even though I was okay to decent in forcing turnovers, they're not getting live ball variety very much, which means they don't have as many opportunities to get easy baskets in transition as they might otherwise.
Hmm.
So it's important from that perspective. But yeah, this is just, I mean, some
They're
of
really
these
bad.
numbers, man, that number against two, and then to be number 291 on the defensive glass, man, they ought to thank their lucky stars they're somehow 167th overall. I don't know how they're doing it, because they should be way worse. For a Big Ten team to be this bad in those areas, it is remarkable. You do not
Yeah.
see it. And you don't often, Iowa is that one team that pretty consistently is sub 100 in overall defensive efficiency ratings. And that's what they are again this year, and they're closer to being sub 200 than in the top 100. So it's bad. When you see a Big 10 team with that kind of number, you've got to know it's truly, truly awful stuff.
Yeah. They are super vulnerable, I guess you'd say, inside. It's certainly with the loss of Freeman. But even before they had trouble, Freeman always would get in foul trouble. So he
Right.
wouldn't play as many minutes as you would expect him to, which I think contributes even more to their, abysmal numbers, even when he was on the team. But they're terrible. And the boards are where you really notice it most. I mean, they just cannot clean up a possession. So, all right, well, let, let's go into the players for Iowa. Brought to you by the Brothers Just Do Gutters. The brothers, of course, are the place you should call if you need gutters worked on. And it's been raining all day today. I don't know about you out in Detroit, but it definitely is
Yes.
gutter season. Make sure if you got junk sitting in your gutter, leaves or sticks and stuff like that, don't get up on the ladder and do it yourself. Call the Brothers Just Do Gutters. They can do it for you. They'll get on the ladder so you don't fall off and cause bigger problems. So have them clean it out. Maybe they need to fix things up. Maybe you need to replace them. Whatever it is, the brothers can do it. They only do gutters. They're not going to try to sell you anything else. And so they just specialize in that. And so anyway, it's the best thing. 10% off if you mention Final Four when you contact them. You can find that at our support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. And there you can have Greg or Kurt take care of you, whether you're on the east or the west side of state. Contact them today. You'll be glad you did. And they sponsor the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter. And we'll begin with the starters, Drew Thelwell. And I would say the starting one thing before we start this, the starting lineup does shift around quite a bit. And I'm not quite sure why it does sometimes, but anyway, because Thelwell has not started every game. It's kind of
This is the one they had in their most recent game.
right. Exactly. He
I'm
started the one, and the one before that he didn't. So I don't know,
he
but
was, but he was coming off a fairly recent injury, though, was he not? I
he
know he
was, but he
missed a
played the
few
game
games.
before, and he started the game before that. So I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. And because he didn't even really play, but he's pretty good. He's 6'3", year transfer from Morehead State. He's averaging almost 10 points a game. A really good shooter, like you mentioned before. He's 52, 44, but then only 68% from the line. He's got a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, but he's only fourth in the team in total assists. he is a good player, and he's brings some athleticism to the guards, which they kind of lack a little bit.
Yeah, I mean you've seen him a lot more, I assume, than I have. To me, he appeared to be, and again, all this is saying we're primarily talking about contributions on the offensive end because you can safely assume there isn't a single guy on Iowa's roster that would be able to say earn minutes at Michigan State because of the way they defend. At
Yeah.
least not playing the way they do at Iowa.
Hmm.
Um, but offensively, he does seem to be a nice addition and a guy who's given them a little bit of an element that they don't always have, with that athleticism. That's not necessarily been a consistent feature of Fran McCaffrey teams to have a guy who can compete athletically at that spot.
And then we have Josh Dix, 6'6", junior, averaging 14.1 points a game, 3.1 rebounds a game, shooting 51, 42, and 78. And he's definitely a 2 or 3 level scorer. He's a guy who can he can drive the lane. He can draw some fouls occasionally. He's got a really sort of his patented shot as he dribbles in about 10 feet out. He does a fadeaway from various spots on the court, and he hits that with quite some consistency. And he also can get going from three. So he's a guy who could drop 30 in a game, but he also could just finish with 8, which is I think why he's averaging about only 14 points a game.
So it's feast or famine. Yeah, I've seen him make those kind of shots with some frequency, so I can second that in terms of that being a big component of his offensive game. I got to give, both he and the next guy we'll talk about, Peyton Sandfort, I do have to give them a lot of credit because to me, and by proxy, Fran McCaffrey some credit. Early in his tenure at Iowa, he would tend to have guys that were just exclusively 3-point shooters. Like I'm
Yes.
drawing a blank on the kid's name. He had a
I
kid
mean,
that
Bohannon was
one,
a pretty much a 3-point guy,
well, he
but he
had a
has the guy
guy
before him. Yeah.
he had a guy who one year took like I don't know what it was, like 120 shots from the floor and 117 of them were from three.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was ridiculous. These guys are not that, and they easily could be because they are both good deep shooters. And when they started their Iowa careers, that's mostly what they contributed. But
Mhm.
both Dix and Sanford, I feel like, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, I feel like they have diversified their offensive games over their time in Iowa City to the point where you really do have to worry about, like as with Dix, that he can penetrate a little bit. He can get within 10 feet and then hit you with a mid-range fadeaway.
Yeah.
He can
And
he
he's
can
six
get to
six.
the right. So exactly, so he can get that shot off.
Yeah.
And
And
he's and he can get to the rim a little bit at times too. So Dix is okay. I mean, he's the kind of player that France had a lot of success with. I certainly don't think their wings are the reason they're where they are. I
yeah.
think those guys are good enough that they could have fit in on most of his teams.
Yep. I think so too. And you're absolutely right about Dix. His game has evolved. He's freshman. He was a 3-point shooter, just like Peyton Sanford was a 3-point shooter. And he's developed other parts of his game, which is, I mean, almost Peyton Sanford, you almost would say he's almost as effective from two than he is at three in many games.
Yeah.
And once he gets going and he can score in a hurry, and he's the next player we'll talk about. He's 6'8". He's a senior, leading the team in scoring. He's averaging a little over 16 points a game. He's also the top rebounder at 6.2 a game. He shoots 40, 33, and 88. And I think, he has one of the quickest releases you'll see where you don't even think he has time to even practically gather the ball and it's already gone and left his hands. And he will shoot from quite a ways behind the line as well and be pretty effective too. He's not like a Kisei Tominaga kind of shooter, but he's definitely a very, very dangerous shooter outside the arc.
I was gonna say, I think the difference between him and a guy like Tominaga is Tominaga would literally take a shot in any situation,
Yeah,
totally out of rhythm, and
random almost.
similar, right, just random. Similarly quick releases. The other advantage Sanford has is that he's 6'8", so he
Yes.
really can get his shot off pretty much all the time if he wants it. Now I think when you see him, and even when you've seen him in previous seasons, you think, well, that guy's a dead eye 3-point shooter. And I don't think he is quite that. I think he's a streak guy. And that's why the 33% number makes some sense to me. And I think it's because he doesn't always, again, it's not as extreme as Tominaga, but he doesn't always take what I think are advisable shots. I think his shot selection, and it's because at Iowa, you got the green light, right?
Sure.
Like he can take whatever shot he wants. And so in his case, I think that means he takes some bad ones.
Hmm.
But he's, as you said, he's a guy as much as maybe anybody in the league you can see hang 9 points on somebody in 50 seconds.
Oh yeah,
I
for
mean, he
sure.
is capable of doing that. He's their leading active scorer and rebounder. He's behind Freeman on the year in both, but in terms of guys we're going to play, he's the top guy. So, he's someone that you're obviously going to have to pay a lot of attention to if you're Michigan State, and he is a challenge because of that size, because of that quick release. But he's also a guy that it kind of, I mean, you tell me. To me, it feels like game to game, you don't know whether you're getting the dialed in Peyton Sanford or the one who might shoot you out of a game.
Yes, I think he's probably the one player, and this is the one thing that the difference between him and Dix. I don't think Dix forces many, where he's like,
Yeah.
someone's got to get a shot up. I'm going to, Dix is much more likely to pass it to someone, and Sanford's going to be the one who's going to throw do the hand grenade shot. So, which I think is part of the reason his percentage down too, as you say. But he is, I think, a guy where if he's alone in the corner, you can almost just guarantee it's going to go in, even if you say he's a little streaky. He's also a guy who's going to shoot a three in a transition much sooner than anybody else, and that's like his. So you have to pick him up when you cross the half court line. So next would be Seydou Traore, a 6'7", 220-pound sophomore. He transferred from Manhattan. He's averaging 6 points a game, 3 rebounds a game, plays about 60 minutes, shoots 43, 24, and 63. He is a player I describe as somebody who thinks he's a much better 3-point shooter than he is, and that he has a better handle than he really does. And so, so he is definitely turnover prone.
So you're not impressed.
No, I mean, he brings some things to them, and there are, like many of these players, and Dembele would be the next word to talk about is as well. These players, they've got some stuff. They've got some, but they just they tend to make some mistakes sometimes, and you just never know which player you're going to get, and that may just be a reflection of him being a sophomore in a new offense. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in this case, Fran went and got a guy who, at least in theory, could be a multi-year player at Iowa.
Right.
Getting someone who is only a sophomore, so he has 2 years more to play. We'll see if they happen in Iowa City or not. But
Yeah.
I
Right.
thought that was interesting. I would expect that they saw him as somebody who could maybe be a developmental player. Like they knew it's not a surprise that he's starting some. He hasn't started most of the year. A lot of those
Right.
starts have come lately. Um, but I think they always viewed him as somebody that would contribute this year, but maybe they thought his best days were ahead of him.
And then finally, as mentioned before, Laje Dembele, 6'8", 260-pound sophomore. He's been obviously more active today recently, especially with the absence of Freeman. He's averaging 4.3 points a game, 3.4 rebounds a game, plays about 15 minutes, shoots 45, 41, and 71. Pretty limited volume, but he is definitely a guy, if you leave alone, he will take the three, whether it's advised or not.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, again, younger player as a sophomore. Anybody with numbers and physical tools like that is intriguing because it is in limited volume, but what that would suggest is, hey, there's a chance that this guy could actually be a capable inside out player for us. Usually with those kind of guys, the perimeter stuff comes later. In his case, I mean, again, you correct me if I'm wrong. My feeling is that despite his size, he hasn't been as good in the post.
That is true. That's
But the
that's pretty
per
much the entire team for the most part,
right,
really.
but the
Yeah.
perimeter game is already there. At
Yeah.
least again, in limited volume, it suggests the potential for that to be a real thing. So he would be a guy I would think is. I think both of those guys are intriguing for the future. They might be guys who can develop further from where we're seeing them now. But for right now, yeah, that's not a great interior combination.
No, and as I'm going through there, you may have noticed if you're listening that everybody's 6'8" or less. So
Right.
it is a team that is, I guess you could say, big at the guards, but small in the middle, right?
Yep.
Like they're all kind of like 6'8".
Good way of putting it. Yep.
Yeah. Moving on to reserves, Brock Harding, who's the backup point guard or occasionally the starting point guard, just depends. And he may play more minutes than Thelwell. It just kind of depends. And he may even play alongside Thelwell. But he's definitely a lot better this year. He was, of course, they always mention at least once in the game that he's former teammates with Owen Freeman in Illinois. He's averaging 8.8 points a game, shooting 44, 38, and 76. So his 3-point shot has really come along this year compared to the previous year. He leads the team with assists with 5 a game, 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, and he has about 1.7 steals a game. He is definitely a pesky guy. Sort of, he's a player that kind of what was the boy? This shows you how bad my memory is. I'm trying to remember who he replaced, who ended up who's from New York, and he was kind of
Oh,
a similar sort
Joe
of
Toussaint.
Yeah, Toussaint. He's sort of like him, except he's better, I guess is
Was a
what I'd
much
say. He's
better
more
shooter.
reliable.
He's a much better shooter.
Yeah, well, for that for sure. But even just
Yeah.
like as far as like decision making, he's much better than
Yeah.
Toussaint was.
I look at Brock Harding and try this one on for size. I think he's kind of a C plus Braden Smith.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Yeah, he's a dangerous shooter. You don't want to leave him alone. He can make plays for teammates and, generally makes pretty good decisions. And although he's nobody's idea of a good defender overall, he can create turnovers. He's the one guy in their lineup who does that, who comes up with
Yep.
steals, just like Braden Smith, the one guy who does that for Purdue. Of course, what goes along with that is those guys are sometimes taking risks to do
Hmm.
that, to try to do that, that you don't like, and they're getting themselves out of position, and you end up with, a blown defensive possession because of it. But that's how I view him. And that's not a knock. I'm not trying to mock him by saying that because Braden Smith may well be Big Ten Player of the Year.
Right.
I, and I think Harding could get better from here. But to me, that's what it looks like. Like he's far from the most toolsy guy you're ever going to see. 6 feet, not super athletic. He's okay, but his skill set is good. His decision making, I think, is improving, and he can do some things for this team. And I think he's going to be more important on the back end of his career.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I think we kind of disagreed at the beginning of the season. I thought he was going to start. You thought he wasn't. And, at the end of the season, it looks like he's not starting. So you're right there. I will say, from a Braden Smith's perspective, he is a huge upgrade as far as facial hair. Moving on to next reserve would be Price Sanford. That's the younger brother of Peyton Sanford, 6'7", sophomore, averaging 8.4 points a game, 2.5 rebounds a game, plays about 21 minutes, shoots 48, 38, and 63. He's basically Peyton Sanford 2 years ago, and that's they're pretty much in the same trajectory. And his shot was really shaky last year, but now he's been very good from outside. And he can definitely get rolling if you're not careful.
Is You would have more of a sense of this than I would. Is there any sense of disappointment with him in the Iowa fan base, do you think?
I don't think so. I think there was last year because I think they were expecting to get Peyton Sanford because Peyton Sanford as a freshman was much better than Price was. But I think Price is probably about what Peyton was as a
Well,
sophomore. Because if you remember Peyton, he was hot for the beginning, maybe quarter of the season, and then he just went like
he went into the
Antarctica
tank.
cold.
He went into
Yeah.
the tank as a sophomore.
Yeah.
Um,
So he's probably better
Shooting
than his brother
great.
was as a sophomore. I don't know.
Yeah, I just the reason I mention that is Price was a much more highly regarded recruit.
True. Yeah, he
Like
was.
Peyton was, I don't even think he was necessarily in the top 100. If he was borderline. Whereas Price was a solid, like top 75-ish guy.
Yeah.
And so I wondered, do people feel like, well, he hasn't been what we thought he was going to be? But yeah, I mean, I would agree that he's having a solid sophomore season. He's certainly important to them because, boy, they don't have a lot off the bench.
No.
And he and Harding give them two guys that can come in and get them a bucket.
Yeah. Moving on then to Evan Bronze, 6'9", 240-pound senior. He transferred from Missouri Valley Belmont, but he has definitely gotten a lot more playing time recently, especially with the absence of Freeman. He's averaging 2.7 points a game, a rebound a game in 7 minutes, but they have really the last 4 or 5 games he's been much more impactful, and he's been playing a ton more. He's playing over 15 minutes a game now. Shoots 76% from the floor, 65% from the line. He is a dunker pretty much,
Yep.
but he is a guy who he's probably the one guy in the team that I could say, I could see him playing for Michigan State. He just kind of plays the right way in that sense.
It's funny that you say that because I'm trying to remember who it was. It was recently. Might have even been who did they trying to
Who did they most
remember
recently lose to?
who they played over the weekend. They played Northwestern. It was the
Yeah.
Northwestern game, I
Hmm.
think. He had a play where they got him the ball um, on an angle. So about free throw line extended, but on an angle, and they got him the ball in a kind of a bounce pass on pick and roll, and he took the ball and in one motion went to the rim, cocked it back a little bit. I mean, it wasn't a full on Jordan, but he cocked it back a little bit and dunked it. And I can't remember the last time I saw an Iowa big man make a move like that. And that's exactly what, like Carson Cooper could do that
Yeah,
in
right.
certain situations. So I think you're right. I do think, and he's a stronger kind of guy. It's every time I've seen him play, he looks to me like he does some good things. So I've kind of struggled to understand. I'm sure there's plenty I'm missing. Why he hasn't been playing more. I mean, he was there last year. He didn't transfer in from Belmont this year. He transferred in
Right.
last year, and he
Yeah.
didn't play a lot last year, and he wasn't playing much this year until very recently. I mean, do you have a sense like why he's been sort of buried until now?
Well, I mean,
I
I
think
think,
he's a useful player from what I've seen.
I totally agree, but I always like, you look at Dembele and look at Traore now. Traore's only shooting
Yeah.
24% from three, but I do think Fran values the 3-point shooting, the stretchability of his big men.
Yeah.
Now, Owen
Fair
Freeman is so
point.
dominant inside that he's got to play him, and you want to have he brings a lot of other things. But Bronze doesn't have the outside shot, and I think that's probably what's limited him in the Iowa offense. At least getting play time, but now he's playing as much as those guys, the Traore and DeBele, just because he's been so effective even defensively, he's been pretty good too. I mean,
Yeah,
certainly better
he's
than
like
what
a
they've
he's
had.
like a fairly live body. Like
Yes,
he's
and
not,
well,
he's not gonna remind you of Jaron Jackson, but he's
yeah,
he's
yeah,
got some pop to him. Like when you see him out there, at least it's been my impression. When I see him out there, my impression has been, yeah, that's a guy that can play a little bit. He
I've
can do some things.
my wife, I sit around, we're like, why is this guy just playing? I mean, we've asked this the same question to the television, like, why is he just now playing? He's certainly a guy. He's not a stiff, right? He can actually do some stuff.
And 76% from the floor
Well,
is
yeah.
not, obviously it's all dunks and layups, but look, there are a lot of guys that are all dunks and layups and they don't shoot 76%.
That is true. That is true. Yeah, he has got no post moves, really. I mean, you're not going to get him the ball, and he's not going to back anyone down.
Yeah, that's why it's another good comparison point when you say he looks like a guy who maybe could play at Michigan State. There's no post moves. So it's kind of like a little bit like a bargain basement Carson Cooper.
Yeah, he's
Um,
shorter. Yeah,
that
right. He
he
could be.
can if you can get him going downhill on a pick and roll, he can get to the rim and finish, you know,
Yeah,
and he
maybe he's
might
like,
be able to get an occasional basket in transition.
yeah, maybe he's like a Thomas Kithier or something like that. Be sort of an equivalent to him.
Yeah.
Going back a little ways. Then we have Carter Kingsbury, 6'5" junior, former walk on. He's son of Chris Kingsbury, who was a guy who was a big time shooter at Iowa. He's only averaging 1.4 points a game. He shoots 48, 36, and 50, obviously in very limited volume. He does not look like a basketball player, in my opinion. He looks like a linebacker playing just like he's really stocky, but he plays really, he's been playing more recently, I think, because he kind of plays defense, and there aren't many players who play defense on the team. And he's smart enough to know who he is, and uh, he's not taking a lot of shots when he shouldn't be. I guess is the way to put it.
Do you remember his father at all?
I I don't too much. I mean, I remember the name and I remember him playing, but I don't remember him
I
specifically.
do.
Yeah,
Um, Very highly regarded player. He was a big time recruit. So, unlike his son who came to Iowa as a walk on, Chris Kingsbury was, God, he might have even been a McDonald's All American. If he wasn't, he was very close to that level. That guy. Now we're kind of used to it in the modern era, in the wake of Steph Curry,
Hmm.
that guys pulling up from 25 feet occasionally aren't quite as shocking as it used to be.
Right.
But in Chris Kingsbury's time, believe me, guys were not shooting from out there except for him. He had, and he was capable of making. I mean, he was a good player. He's capable of making jumpers, but his shot selection stood out. It was nuts, absolutely insane for the time. Like they don't have it anymore, but there used to be this thing called the timeline, which was a line that was just a little bit before half court, fairly
Right.
deep, probably at least 25 feet from the basket, maybe even a little further out than that. He would regularly take shots from there. And you just felt, what the hell am I watching? And he'd hit just enough of them. Nobody was going to guard him out there. He was also built that way, though. He looked like a football player. But I
Yeah.
was just curious if you remembered him because his dad is a very memorable player for me. If you saw him play, you would not easily forget. And I suppose for the family, it probably means a lot that Carter's actually worked himself into a spot where he's on scholarship this year. He came there, as we said, as a walk on, and he's actually playing some.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's been very more than serviceable out there. He's been very, I think, helpful for the team. And finally, Riley Mulvey. He's the only size on this team as far as height. He's 6'11", 245-pound junior. Doesn't play much though. He's only averages 2.4 points a game, 2.1 rebounds a game. Plays just about 7 minutes, shooting 68% from the floor, 58% from the line. But he's a guy who just kind of struggles to sort of compete out on both ends of the floor. So he'll have his moments, but for the most part, I don't know. He doesn't bring a whole lot to the game, which is too bad for them because of course they definitely need the size.
He definitely seems to have been recruited over.
Yep.
When you look at guys that they've taken since then, they clearly decided that he was probably not going to be, at least not the total answer
Hmm.
inside, because yeah, he's been there a while now. He's had opportunities and has just never been able to fully seize them.
All right, so went over the Iowa lineup. Who do you think is the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter?
Well, I think Dix is going to get his, and I would expect that Harding might also be capable of putting up some points. But to me, it's fairly obvious. It's the leading scorer, which is
Yeah.
not going out on a limb. It's Peyton Sanford. But the reason specifically that I say that about him is he's the guy, as we talked about, that is fully capable, more so than anybody else, of going on an absolute heater. And I think he's the one guy that I could see by himself keeping them in the game. We've several times this year we've talked about Dawson Garcia at Minnesota being good enough that you can say, hey, they might not be a great team, but that guy's good enough that on a given night he could carry them across the finish line by himself. And he, in
Right.
fact, has done that several
Yeah.
times. I think Sanford is that guy for Iowa. That he's the
Yeah.
guy you worry about. Boy, if he just gets on a roll, and the shots start falling for him, you could blink and look up and see that he's hung 35 on you.
Yeah.
Like I
And
don't expect that, but the fact that he has the potential to do it is what makes him the guy they've really got to focus on.
yeah, no, I think he's option 1A. I do think Josh Dix is a guy who could hurt you as well. And so that's the other one that Michigan needs to worry about because he can also heat up and score. He could,
But
like I
I
said,
think
he could
the
drop 30
but I
and he can
think the
get hot too.
difference there is something you said earlier, which is that Peyton Sanford is the kind of guy that he gets it in his mind that he's shooting.
Yeah.
This
Right.
possession, he's getting a shot up. Whereas Dix doesn't do that. If I'm talking about a team over the course of a season, I probably want somebody a little more like Dix.
Right.
But in a game like this, I'd probably lean more towards Sanford because I know I've got to have something extraordinary happen to stay in the game. And he's the guy who's more likely to push the envelope.
All right, that brings us to who cleans the glass best. We know that in Grand Rapids area, it's the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. So if you need your windows cleaned or your house washed, make sure you contact the Squeegee Squad. They do fantastic work. They did my house. They offer great discounts for listeners of the show. You get 15% off by just mentioning Final Four when you get your estimate, which you can do over at our support page at tffinots.com/support. Reach out to the squeegee squad. You'll be glad you did. They can take care of the windows, inside, outside, windowsills, the whole kit and caboodle. They'll take care of everything for you, and you won't regret it. And so they sponsor the Who Cleans Glass Best contest, which for Michigan State, which is right now a runaway. I'm just about the point where I almost have to concede the game. It's 15-9 for the season. Maybe we'll have to just do a postseason to make me feel like I can compete at some level. But I get to pick first here, and with our snake draft, and whose idea was the snake draft anyway? Was it my? I think it was
It
my
was your
idea.
idea.
It
Yeah.
was a listener's idea, but I adopted it. So I'm going to take Kohler because you have to. I'm sure something will happen, but this is a game where I expect Michigan State to have lots of rebounds, and so I think
Yeah.
Kohler is going to have plenty of
Well,
opportunities
he's a
on the
good
defensive end.
choice.
Yeah,
I'm going to go with the obvious second choice, Carson Cooper.
right.
And then the third choice, I think, has gotten really interesting now
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
because we've got a lot of guys who you can point to as having had individual games here and there that would suggest they should be considered. I'm going to go with Jace Richardson.
Okay.
Just have a feeling. I have a feeling with Iowa taking a lot of threes, hopefully missing a lot, that there'll be some long rebounds. He's been good in that area. I'm going with Jace.
Yeah, this is a game you can kind of envision. You can envision going a couple different ways because if this game gets a little out of hand, where Michigan State's up, say like 15 to 20 points, maybe in the even the late second half, which is possible, or the late in the first half, it's possible. Uh, you could see a lot more extended minutes for, say, a Booker or a Fiddler,
Yep.
and you might have sort of different people with a bunch of rebounds that you're not expecting, and it makes it hard. I think you'll see Richardson's going to get his minutes, and that's almost where you can say that makes you feel better about having him out there. And I'll just go with Akins for the same reason. I think Akins will
Okay.
be out there a lot, I think it'll be a lot of long rebounds. And he had, I think he had 5 or 6 in the last game as well as Richardson. Now I think Richardson got him.
Aikens had 8.
He had 8, yeah. So he definitely can get him. We know it, and this will be an opportunity for him too, because it's going to be a lot of defensive rebounds. I think. Well, they theoretically they should rebound both ends, which we'll get to in just a little bit here. Which brings us to the last part of the show, the Nudge Printing's 5 keys to the game for Michigan State's victory over Iowa. Nudge Printing is your go-to spot. You can see if you're watching YouTube, you can see me right now wearing our logo quarter zip, which is super comfortable. Great green color. It's they got just ones with the regular Spartan logos. It's like I mentioned, at some point we have to offer these up again through Nudge. I got to talk to him about that. But you get 20% off as a listener to the show. So you get just mentioned Final Four. This says type it one word in the coupon code. I just did it the last week when I got a Michigan Mom shirt and a little decal for a computer for my daughter. So they have, and my wife put it on. She's like, "Whoa, this is really, really comfortable." So it's really high quality stuff, and we love all our Nudge stuff. And so again, if you want good stuff, high quality screen printed material, which so it sustains all the washes, go to Nudge Printing. You'll be glad you did. All right, so the first key to the game is focus. Michigan State, like I mentioned before, they're rolling. They've won 5 in a row against Quad One. This is actually, even though Iowa's kind of not a very good team, they're still technically a Quad One opportunity because it's on the road. I think you have to be inside the top 75, is it? So this could turn into a Quad Two by the end of the season when it's all
Yeah.
said and done. Who knows?
It's
Doesn't really
it's
matter much.
the only saving grace is Michigan State beating Iowa at home. Yeah, I mean they're right on the borderline
Yeah,
anyway.
but it doesn't
Um,
matter. I mean, from a seeding standpoint, it doesn't really make too much difference as long as
right,
Michigan State wins the game. I mean, if they lose it, ironically, it'd probably just be a quad one loss because then I would go move
right,
up a little bit. But
right.
we don't want to think about that. Obviously, the other stakes of the game, like I mentioned, we're recording this before Michigan plays Maryland at home. If Michigan loses, then this is for an outright title of the Big Ten. If Michigan wins, this is for a guarantee at worst a Big Ten title. So there's a lot on the line. It's easy to kind of forget that, I suppose, or to sort of get lost in the fact that you've got a team that is really desperate, right? I mean, Iowa's, for all intents and purposes, I think they're playing for their life right now to get the Big Ten tournament, and to make my wife happy. Although she'd rather have them beat Nebraska because she'd like to watch some team at least one of the days before Michigan State starts playing.
Yeah, this is I definitely hesitate because I don't entirely buy into it to say, well, this is the proverbial trap game, right?
Right.
You've got everything in front of you. You got Michigan looming on the weekend, senior day. You're thinking about, or you could possibly be thinking about, seeding in the NCAA tournament, the Big Ten tournament, all of those things. And might it mean that you look past an Iowa team that's been pretty bad and that, people just assume you should handle? That's valid. But I think that if this Michigan State team has demonstrated anything this year, it's that
Yes.
they've shown a remarkable ability to focus on what's right in front of them. And that's what's required. You take that one game at a time mentality, which gets said so often that it becomes a cliche, but it's also a cliche because there's some truth to it.
Hmm.
And in this case, there definitely is. So obviously, that's key that Michigan State come in having prepared well. And it sounds like Tom Izzo, I heard him yesterday say they'd had another great practice. And for once, this year, that hasn't proven to be a kiss of death.
Yeah, it seems like
He's
it's,
he's said it
yeah,
a lot this year, and they've played very well a lot this year.
yeah.
So it's added up. But I think this group has done enough to have given us enough reason to have some faith that they're going to come out ready.
Hmm.
They're not going to come in coasting into this one, just roll the balls out. They're not that kind of team. They're not a roll out the balls kind of team. Where, hey, just don't worry about it. Just put them out there. We'll win.
Yeah.
They got to come in locked in, and I think they've shown a high level of capability of doing just that night in, night out.
Yeah. And I think the fact that the depth where you have quality depth all the way down to 10, you just can't afford if you're a player to just play that way because you're not going to be playing as many minutes in the game. It has been proven no matter who you are, whether you're the senior Jaden Akins or,
Absolutely.
someone else. And so
But look, Jaden Akins wasn't playing well one game. Kurt
right,
Tang, who has not been in
exactly.
the rotation, came in and played like whatever it was, 6 minutes.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
mean, that's what I mean.
nobody's safe.
That's
Nobody's
why I
safe.
don't think they played. And as far as a trap game, I totally agree. Except I would say I would be more concerned actually them sort of having the effort of a trap game if it's at home. I think the fact that it's on road makes it a little bit easier to not look past this team because you sort of expect a tougher battle and matchup. And of course, it's senior night for Iowa as well. So,
Well, and look, Michigan State this year has been a really good road team.
7-2 is pretty good.
7-2. And you look at, winning at Illinois the way they did, winning
Hmm.
at Maryland, the only home loss Maryland's taken all year in the league. I would even put, people want to poo-poo it, but I would put, early season wins at Northwestern, at Ohio State. Those are not easy places to get wins.
Yeah.
And Michigan State has done a remarkably good job of handling those kind of environments.
And then number two, key to the game is guarding the arc. This is obviously a big important factor against Wisconsin. Iowa, there are all sorts of scenarios of Iowa winning, and they almost all involve Iowa hitting the threes at a pretty good clip. And so if you can limit them to the three, you imagine you're going to have a pretty good opportunity to limit Iowa's opportunity to win this game because they don't, offensive rebound too well. So got to guard the arc. And Michigan State has shown an ability this season to do a really great job, where they're number 4 in the country, I think, in 3-point percentage against. So they are very good. And so there's every reason to think they're going to be successful again here, I think.
Well, they need to be.
Yeah, well, right,
That
true.
much is certain, but let's just talk some numbers, and we've referenced some of these before. So over this 5-game winning streak, they've held opponents to 22% shooting from three. That is phenomenal. More impressively, over the last three, which included Michigan, who has been struggling from three, admittedly, but Wisconsin and Maryland, both of whom have shot the three extremely well all year long.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan State's held their last three opponents to 19% from three. As we've talked about, there is always an argument that, at least to some extent, 3-point defense is luck reliant. And there is an argument for that. I'm not about to suggest that there isn't. But also, at some point, when you see what Michigan State has done and continues to do, and in fact is doing better now than at any point this season, considering who they're playing against.
Right.
It's a lot more than just luck. Yeah, and again, this is where the eye test matters, right? So we talk about that, and we spend a lot of time talking about metrics, statistics. I believe it's at the core of not just what any fan should be doing or media member to try to understand a game, but it's at the core of what college basketball programs do. So nobody's suggesting that statistics don't matter a ton, but this is a case where I think just looking at the statistics, opposite having watched them play, would perhaps lead you to some false conclusions, like well, that's luck dependent. And I'll give you a quick example. I read some Wisconsin fan forums after the game the other day, and not surprisingly, some of their fans were complaining that, oh, we missed a bunch of wide open shots, good looks, just didn't fall for us. They actually had a couple people there who checked it and said, yeah, but you've got to understand that it's not just about, was the guy quote unquote open, because that can mean different things. Is the window, the amount of time which he's open, and the amount of pressure he might feel because he knows a defender is close, how is that? Are their legs a little weak because they've been pushed by Michigan State's depth? And especially in the latter stages of the game, do they have enough gas in the tank to be able to get a good shot up? Or are they coming up short because they're tired? You know, these kind of, are the shots coming in rhythm? There are times Michigan State this year when we talk about missing open shots that they've missed shots that are technically open, but I didn't feel came in good rhythm.
Yep.
And that can be enough. So you got to go deeper, and some of that stuff is very difficult to really get at unless you're watching it. I'm saying all of that to make the point that believe the numbers in this case. Believe that Michigan State can shut down opponents from three. Now, does that mean they do it every single time out? No, there's always a chance, as we know because we've seen it, that a guy or a couple of guys can manage to hit shots that you defended incredibly well and they just hit them.
Yep.
And Iowa's got shooters that are capable of doing that. Absolutely. But I like Michigan State's odds.
Yeah.
And
no, I agree.
And I also agree with one other thing you said, and then we can move on. It is hard to see a scenario where Iowa stays in this game, never mind winning it, unless they're really doing damage from three.
Yeah.
I think it's clearly the most important part of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's hard to envision. Almost have to be Michigan State going beyond frigid ice cold to
You just have to be
pull off.
missing a ton of twos. They'd have to be missing free
And not
throws.
rebounding either.
Right, not rebounding, turning the ball over, 20 turnovers, something crazy like that. Yeah, it would have to, and it would probably have to be multiple examples of those things, not just one of them.
All right, so then moving on to the third key to the game is the boards. We always talk about turnovers and offensive rebounding are sort of the extra opportunities to score. The more of those you have, obviously, the higher your chance of winning a game. I don't exactly know what adjective one would use to describe Iowa's rebounding at either the offensive or defensive end. Putrid is probably the best I can come up with, but maybe that's even being too kind to the Hawkeyes. So this is a place Michigan State really has to just take advantage of and try and really trying to just punish the Hawkeyes.
100%. There's no excuse for not having a serious advantage in this game. None. And you want to have it because, as we know, Iowa, as they typically do, tends to value the ball pretty well. And again, they've been decent in terms of forcing turnovers. Some of that as a result of the pressure they throw out there. It's also worth mentioning. I expect that this is a game that we'll see a lot of zone. I don't think it'll exclusively be zone, but we'll see a lot of it. And so those two things, given the way this Michigan State team has played at times this year, would lead you to believe that it's fair to expect there may be a turnover deficit. I don't know how big it'll be, but there probably will be something there. So MSU's got to make up for that and then some. And where do they do it? How do they do it? They do it on the boards.
Yeah. And the one thing I guess you'd be concerned about is if you're just launching just all threes against the zone, and then it might be more difficult rebounding,
Well,
as
what I
opposed
was
to
going
penetrating.
to, yes, and um, it's also probably something of an explanation because they are not just going to play zone against Michigan State. That you know this, you've seen them more than I have.
Yeah.
They play a lot of zone. Period. They have
Oh
to
yeah.
because
Yeah.
they just
This is
don't
what they
have the
do. Yeah.
athletes,
So they're
and that
better at
you
playing zone than other
it,
teams,
it
maybe.
usually exposes you on the defensive boards.
Yeah.
So it's all the more reason Michigan State needs to ring up a big margin.
So the fourth key of the game is the free throw line. Michigan State, the one thing you could criticize them of the last over the past 4 to 5 games, not getting to the line as much as you expect, and even when they're getting there, they're not converting real well. So you'd like to see them sort of get back on the horse there as far as getting going in the free throw line and getting back up to the 80% mark. And so anyway, and I think especially this game, they'll have plenty of opportunities to getting into the rack and getting fouled. So this may be a chance. Although Iowa's in some ways they don't foul a ton because they don't get close enough to you to foul you.
Yeah, they're only 34th in or I shouldn't say only, they are 34th
Right.
in opponent free throw rate, which is
You can
very
only, but
good.
if you can't reach an opponent because they're so far away from you, you can't foul them.
I think that's probably true. It That number may be more of an expression of overall passivity than anything else. But I do think it's going to be interesting because I do expect to see a fair amount of zone. And we have seen Michigan State be inconsistent in terms of how they've attacked zone defenses. I think it will be interesting in particular to see how much activity they can get going at the rim because that's what you
Yeah.
want to see. I don't want to see hoisting a ton of threes against their zone. I want to see the ball either via the dribble or via the pass getting into the gaps, forcing it to contract, and then getting easy chances at the rim to either score, draw contact, or both. And so that's going to be interesting to see. Is that a way that maybe Michigan State can get their foul line game back in order? Because it is the one thing that you can criticize over this winning streak. They've done pretty much everything else really, really well. But they have not been shooting nearly as many free throws as we've come to expect over the course of the season. And the ones they have gotten, they haven't shot as well.
Right.
So you want to see
Exactly.
both of those things tick back up.
And so then the fifth and final key to the game is winning transition. This is something that we expect Michigan State to do well. Fast break points. They're one of the best teams in the country, fast break points. But, Iowa's actually has quite a bit of transition game as well. So you want to see Michigan State with an advantage here.
Well, look, they always under Fran McCaffrey play fast, and they're a rare Big Ten team that I mean we've talked about it before that tempo in the league has revved up a bit this year. We've got some teams playing very fast, and we've got some teams that have historically been glacial, who are at least in the middle of the pack, like Wisconsin, and we saw
Right.
evidence of that on Sunday. Like that was not the normal pace you see from Wisconsin. They didn't try to slow it down against Michigan State. They went at it. Iowa, on the other hand, is full tilt all the time. And again, unlike most of their Big Ten counterparts, one of the ways they try to do that is via pressure. They will throw occasional trapping pressure. They don't commit to it 100% of the time or anything close to that, but they will do it. I mean, what's your impression? Your impression they're basically status quo? They're doing what they normally do in that regard. They spring it
I think
occasionally.
I think so, and I would say the full court pressure is it feels like a little bit less this year, but I don't know. You'd have to probably look at the stats, but it seems pretty typical of what they normally
Yeah,
do.
that's my
And then as far
impression.
as the defense, often whether zone or man, I think it's mostly zone, but it's probably like 60-40 zone.
That's exactly. I think it'll be a lot of it, not exclusively. Uh,
Yeah.
but in terms of tempo, that pressure does create opportunities. Because again, they're not going to do, who do we see? Maryland was really good recently in terms of utilizing pressure as a defensive tool, not to create turnovers, but to force Michigan State to use clock, right? So
Yep.
they weren't trapping, but they were still forcing MSU to take, 8 seconds, 9 seconds off the clock before they really got into the forecourt. Iowa's not that. Iowa will try to create stuff with it.
Yeah.
Now, again, they haven't been very good at generating steals. So if they play according to form, we shouldn't expect to see a bunch of live ball turnovers. But they have forced a lot of turnovers, so it's something to consider. If you're Michigan State and they're playing trap, they're sprinting, trapping pressure at you, you got to not just survive it. You want to punish it.
Yeah.
And I think in general, that's the MO here. Iowa wants to run, they want to play fast. Great, let's do it. And if you're Michigan State, you fully expect to come out on top in transition points. You should, because there's one big difference between these teams. Both of them want to run offensively, but only one of them gets back well defensively. That ought to be enough to win you that battle.
For sure. Yeah, and you look at these teams. I mean, obviously Iowa's not good this year. They're 6-12. Even their starters, I struggle to see if those starters, if they were on Michigan State, like how many of them would be in the top 10 of the rotation. I mean, I think the talent deficit is greater than it has been for quite some time at Iowa. I mean, there are a couple players you could imagine playing, but some of them are
Well,
pretty rough, and I just
look,
don't know.
I think that Sanford and Dix they would not be good fits for Michigan State's program, but as generic, consider them in a vacuum players.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Those
thinking.
are
Yeah,
two those are two guys that would probably play for most teams in the Big Ten because most coaches are going to be a little more forgiving of the defensive end than Izzo. But I would agree with you. Once you get past them, Owen Freeman obviously would have been. He was a guy Michigan
sure.
State recruited.
Yeah,
They wanted him. And he would have been a guy who could have played at Michigan State. But you get much beyond that, and I tend to agree with you. Like there's not a lot here, and it's maybe one of the reasons to bring it back around to what we were talking about in the very beginning. It's maybe one of the things that if you were an Iowa fan, you could look at and say, "Yeah, this feels like a guy who's checked out." Because the
it
talent
does.
level's not what it's been. Not that Iowa has not had like top 50 national laden rosters or anything like that. But they've had pretty good talent for a lot of Fran's tenure. They've had
Yeah,
guys that you looked at and said, "Yeah, this is a good starting five. That's a good rotation." Garza was obviously a star. Both of the Murray brothers became stars. Who's the other
Wieskamp.
guy? Weiskamp,
Yep.
Joe. He was a star. Like they had several guys not that long ago that Roy Marble Jr.
Even
They
Bohannon.
had guys during his tenure that were really good players.
Yeah.
And this does not feel the same way.
No, it does. I mean, I was there during the end of the Hayden Fry era for football. I was there at the late stage, like the
Yeah.
last year or two, and I would say it doesn't feel like that, but it's like right before that is what is what it feels like at Iowa right now.
Well, I think that's ultimately when we talk about Fran and his future, that's the question. If you're in the Iowa athletic department, that's the question you got to be asking yourself is okay, if he stays, what does the near term look? What is next year, the year after
Yeah,
that? What does that look like? Is there a plan? Is there something in place that's going to make it so that we are not at this kind of talent deficit going forward? I'd say this. If I were Iowa, I might be worried about somebody swooping in and trying to steal Owen Freeman away.
oh, I
Because
don't think there's any
Iowa,
question.
it does
Yeah,
not strike me that Iowa basketball has been anywhere near the lead pack in terms of NIL spend. And it's a guess, but you can surmise that from what they've done in the portal.
yeah,
Like they've added guys, but they really haven't added heavy duty guys.
right. Guy from Manhattan, Belmont, or yeah, right,
This year you
exactly.
see it. They've had some other guys. Who was the big kid they had the last couple of years? Came from the Missouri Valley.
He came from. You're thinking of Damask? No, no, not
No, not
Damask.
Damask. That was Illinois. The big
Yeah,
kid Iowa had.
yeah, yeah.
You know who I'm talking
I
about.
know who you're talking about. I can't remember
That's
where he.
kind of the level where it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, good player, some competition for him, but not where you were going to have to lay out heavy dollars. So It's similar. I had this discussion the other night with someone who I shall remain nameless, but is in a position to know these things, who told me that Ben Johnson at Minnesota is very much on the ropes.
Yeah.
And in fact, if they had lost the game that they managed to pull out on a buzzer beater against Nebraska, he might have been fired that night. And the reason for this is that apparently the athletic department has lined up a booster who has agreed to fund, or boosters who have agreed to really put some actual money behind the NIL program there. And that's one of the things we've talked about it many times, right? That's been
Yeah.
really missing at Minnesota. It's one of the reasons Ben Johnson has not been able to get that program on. It feels like he's always fighting with one hand tied behind his back.
Yeah,
He
I agree.
he had a good team, a competitive team last year, ended up losing a couple guys to NIL, where they went. One of them is starting, the Payne kid, the big man, is starting for a very good team at Texas A&M this year. He also lost his point guard.
Yeah.
Uh, Apparently, the condition for this NIL boost is that it can't go to Ben Johnson. They're not going to put that money behind Ben Johnson. I personally think that's very unfair to Ben Johnson. I
Well,
thought we both talked about it. I think we both think he's a pretty impressive coach for what he's done, given what he's had to work with. But this is what happens, and
yeah.
it's a huge part of the equation now. And I'm bringing all this up to bring it back around to Fran. If you're an Iowa booster and the athletic department is coming to you and saying, "Listen, we need help. We can't compete. You're seeing it. We're at a talent deficit. We need to be able to go out and get just buy some guys." Which again, as a Michigan State fan, I don't love that approach, but that's the reality,
Right.
right? A lot of these
hmm
guys are facing, and it does matter at most places. Most places are not coached by Tom Izzo, where you don't have to do that, or Matt Painter. But if you're that booster, do you look at Fran McCaffrey with where he's on in the curve of his career and say, yep, all Fran needs is a couple mil behind him and we're in great shape? I don't know about that.
Yeah. No, you're right. And that they're going to have pull a lot of strings, and that ultimately may be what makes the decision anyway, right? I mean, it may not even be. In some respects, it's not the athletic department. It's the boosters who are giving in the ear of the athletic department, the AD. So
I think in a lot of places that's exactly the dynamic.
yeah, I
I
think
think
that's probably the case.
that has become the reality, which I think is also on when these coaches that have retired recently talk about the reasons why, and it always comes up that it's a generalized dislike of the portal, dislike of the
Yeah.
NIL era and what that means. But this is a very specific kind of dynamic that, it was there in a lot of programs for a long time. So it's kind of funny to me to see some of the guys, not everybody, like a Jay Wright. Hey, Jay Wright played it straight from everything I've always heard.
Right.
There are guys who have retired. It's like, come on, seriously? You're gonna cry about this stuff when you had people doing it when when it wasn't legal by NCAA
Lost the
regulation?
competitive advantage.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
But now it's all much more overt and on the table. And absolutely that's a dynamic that's in play where boosters are saying, you know, I won't go into details on this, but I know I was curious at Michigan State when the Mel Tucker thing started to blow up.
Right.
And my feeling, because I'm an attorney, and so I'm trained to think this way. I think among our attorney listeners, which I'm sure we've got some, I would hope, would see it in roughly the same way.
Shout out
My
to Rich.
thought immediately went to, look, the this guy is going. He's going, no two ways about it. He's done.
Yeah.
So the worst thing you can do is let this drag out, let him keep talking about it, keep the story in the news. The best thing is cut a check, settle it with him, and put it in the rearview mirror, and then you move on to hiring the next guy. Like that's oftentimes the dynamic when you have these kind of disputes, is you might be willing to cut a check for something in order to end whatever the situation is.
Right.
Michigan State did not do that, and I think it's actually I would absolutely cop to being wrong about how that has played out. But I happen to know one of the more significant boosters at Michigan State very tangentially. I know people who are related to him far, far more. And I was told, and again, I'm not naming the person, but I was told that the family member asked them when this was all going on, yeah, I mean, what do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to cut a check to end this with Mel? And his response, and this is somebody who was very much involved in that post 2021 effort to keep Mel Tucker, where they came up with the big raise.
Right.
He said, well, they might, but it's not going to be with my money. So,
Yeah.
that's just an illustration of how this stuff goes and how reliant the athletic departments are. And you're right, what it can turn into is a situation where the money people are actually calling the tune. You very rarely have situations like the one at Michigan State where that dynamic is unthinkable.
Yeah.
It would never happen, right? Just
Yeah.
with Tom Izzo, I mean, would never
Sure.
happen. You could never get there. Iowa, Minnesota, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either. Yeah. You have to know all the insiders. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. We got kind of long with talking about Iowa, but this is obviously an opportunity for Michigan State to win the Big Ten. So we'll be live after the game to talk about what Michigan State did or didn't do well. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.